and you could save, major taxes and then always increase your properties. So it has to be like in kind or greater to or equal value, or you can even take a loan if you want greater value on a property. But you could save some people some major taxes by doing that.
Welcome to the Next Level Income Show, where it's our goal to take your income, your investments, and your life to the next level. I'm your host, Chris Larson. If you haven't yet, get a copy of our book for free at our website, nextlevelincome.com. That's www.nextlevelincome.com. Just click on the book link, and I'll even send you a copy if you put your address in. On today's show, we have Tim Tepes. Tim and I are going to talk about how to create generational wealth using 1031s, DSTs, some of the life lessons that he's learned. And if you're listening here and you want to learn some of the same strategies that I've learned and that Tim has learned over decades, not easy, but straightforward to create generational wealth, we're going to dive into it today. Tim, welcome to the show.
And welcome. Thank you for having me, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm excited to have you on here, Tim, and I'm excited for you to share a little bit about your story with our audience. And then we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which you and I were chatting about before the show, which is, tools and strategies to build generational wealth for our families. Because I know a lot of listeners are like me, they're professionals, they're doctors, they're business owners, and they've worked their whole lives and they've built up wealth. They have real estate investments, and one of the things we love to do is help educate the next generation, but there's this strategy that financial advisors have been talking about for decades now. And I remember having this argument a year ago with debate. Let's call it a debate with a financial advisor. And he said, well, my clients, they get term insurance and they don't need insurance, because they're going to have enough funds for them. And, then they don't have to basically worry about estate tax. And I'm like, and I said, that just seems kind of like you're not going to plan for the future and do that. So, it's a very different methodology and very different philosophy we teach here, which is why I wanted to have you on, Tim, and talk about some of these strategies. But before we do, would love for you to share a little bit about your story, how you got to this point.
Well, that's great, Chris. How I got to this point, we could be here all day just talking about that.
Sure.
I grew up as a third generation builder, and I went to college for business and an architect degree. And I thought I'm going to be in the construction business, building homes and drawing homes and work in the office. My first day on the job site with my dad out of college, he took an old ladder, cut the bottom rung off in front of about 100 different workers that day and said, "You're at the bottom of the ladder. You got to work your way up." So,
oh man, I love it.
It was a hard learning experience,
Yeah. Hard for you. That was funny though.
But if you want to, if you wanted something, you work for it. So nothing was ever handed to you. So
Yeah.
after doing so much of hammering nails, and I got into real estate. So then I bought a few investment properties, and then I was selling real estate and worked my way up to an investor to where we're at now.
Yeah, I love that. And that's you bring up a good point. I think it's something that I work with my boys on. One of the reasons I love having them in sports. I remember our first conversation. I think I was heading up to one of my son's lacrosse tournaments when we were chatting on the phone. But you provide a certain lifestyle, a certain level of wealth that you've worked hard for. And like I grew up very blue collar. I had to buy my first. I raced bicycles. I saved $700 cash to buy my first bike. That I had to pay for myself. I had to get to races myself. I went through a lot of challenges that I had to figure out. And looking back, it was like, man, I wish my parents helped me more. But I actually never say that. I always say, man, I'm really grateful that I had to go through those challenges because it gave me a skill set. I was raising money at 15 years old. I was raising money for my cycling team. And that taught me a lot of skills that helped me out in my sales career. So it's awesome that your dad created a structure to teach you those same skills. What are some skills or what are some strategies that you've learned to pass those same lessons on to your family?
Well, it's interesting to say about being grateful about the lessons you learn from your parents. And one summer, I think between seventh and eighth grade, I actually went to work for another construction company because they were paying me $1 more an hour. So I left to work for somebody else.
Yeah.
And then I still was working for my dad besides, but there was a lot of great value there. And if you look over the time, okay, and to bring up, everyone talks about Rich Dad, Poor Dad with Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah.
But I have to look over the way. I had a lot of great mentors and a lot of great fathers in that respect. Yeah. My very first mentor in real estate taught me about the stock market, about dollar cost average and dividend reinvestment.
I love
and
that.
passive income. And, then I obviously learned about the snowball effect and,
Yeah.
Albert Einstein saying the eighth wonder of the world is compounding interest. And I love compounding interest and passive income,
Yeah.
which basically becomes mailbox money when you buy some great stocks and your the stocks aristocrats, you
Yeah.
look at those who pay the dividends. But over the years, it's basically, it's showing up as half the battle. Being
Mm.
there, being involved, and then learning from as many people as you can. So there've been so
Yeah.
many great mentors over the years,
Yeah.
and then those
No.
mentors become good friends as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I like myself. I had my father passed away when I was 5. I had a stepdad, and he's the one that took me on the job site shoveling shingles like in July, and doing yard work and all those different things, which it teaches you one the value of physical labor and being comfortable doing that, but also teaches you you look around and a lot of the guys, the contractors that my dad had working for him, they had substance abuse problems. They had lost their license because of drinking, so you'd have to pick them up. And I'd look around and I'm like, wow, like I don't know if this is what I want my future to look like. So it gave me some
Sure.
good perspective. But then through church, I had my rich dad. His name was Clint, and he got me introduced to cycling. And he was the same one. I'll never forget, Tim. I love that you mentioned compound interest and learn about the stock market. He gave me a money magazine my freshman year in college, and it was right after Roth IRAs had come out. And it showed the math of how you could become a millionaire starting at 18 by just investing. It was like a few $100 a month. And I just remember looking at that, that chart, that exponential curve on that page, and I said, "Oh wow, I got to start this." I opened up my Roth IRA with Vanguard that same year. So yeah, if you're listening, that I think that's a big thing. If you can be a mentor to your children, that's great. If you're young, one of the big things, people ask me on podcasts, "Hey, what advice would you give your younger self?" Go find a mentor. Go find someone that's already done this. And that's what we love to do on the podcast here is give you access to people like yourself, Tim, that can be virtual mentors, and do that. So you went into real estate yourself. When did you make your first real estate investment?
So let me back up real quick. You said
Yeah, please.
your mentor gave you the Money Magazine, and it was
Yeah,
funny. I got the Money Magazine as well.
yeah,
And the Money Magazine too was about mutual funds were just basically coming out
yeah,
and, lower costs. And at
yeah.
that time, you didn't have the discount brokers,
No,
but there was a
yeah.
group called the NAAC, National Association of Investment Clubs, and I got involved with that.
Oh wow.
What's interesting is the magazine there had stocks you could buy without a broker, and it was
Oh,
basically a
interesting.
$7 fee to buy it, and
Yeah,
then
like
whatever
Schwab back,
stock would
like
it
the
was
original
Schwab,
Schwab.
exactly.
Yeah,
So how cheap I was, I went to the Barnes and Nobles just opened up. They're opening a week in the mall by our house. I got the 100 best stocks to own in corporate America. I didn't even buy the book. I just opened the book, took the magazine in, and checked off those stocks. And I started buying those
yeah.
stocks at 22. And now
Wow.
58, I still have a dollar cost average, dividend reinvestment, but it's like $25 here, $100 there, and it's all
Yeah,
big blue chips. They're not excited, but they pay dividends.
yeah,
So, I
yeah,
just wanted to add that, and that's where I got a lot of that stuff from
yeah,
the Money magazine. I still, well, now it's Clippinger magazine, but I still get the
yeah,
magazine and I still look at stuff like that. The
yeah.
stock has me going. When it came to investment properties, my grandparents had some investment properties, and my grandfather, when it started the construction company in 1950, a few townhouses.
Oh
My
wow.
father bought him out in 79. And then my goal was to buy my father up. And unfortunately, like you said, you lost your father. I just lost my father in September.
I'm sorry.
And I had my real estate business. He had the construction business with two separate companies, but I'm kind of taking over his stuff. But
Yeah.
I bought from the estate, and how the estate was, again, nothing was handed to you. It had to be two appraisals done, independent appraisals, and then took the average of two, and that's what I had to buy it for.
Wow. Wow.
So
That's yeah.
I paid market value for them. It wasn't handed to me, but I was already managing and knowing the units because my grandfather was getting sick at that time, and I kind of took over and I knew I wanted to do this. And then since
Yeah.
then, I've just been adding properties to the
Yeah.
list over the years.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And again, yeah, even posthumously, your father, instills those lessons, which I think is fantastic
Yeah, it was
for
great because,
investing.
I had coffee with my dad in the construction office every day with other people and stuff like that. And it was always about investing and going back and forth. These are all their small business owners.
Yeah.
And now it's down to only two of them because I hate to say most of
Wow.
them either died off or they're in a home. There was like
Oh,
20 that would meet regularly on a Friday and maybe 10 during the week every day. Now
Yeah.
there's the three of us that come in here and meet, but it's still, it's always a bit on top of the market, what's going on, happening, and we just learn from each other. And like your
That's so
podcast,
cool.
stuff like
Yeah.
this is great,
Yeah.
just listening to other people and their stories.
Yeah. That's awesome. You guys, your father, you all built almost like your own mastermind, to share.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Before the internet,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's phenomenal. Well, I'd love to transition here a little bit because one of the things that I talk about in my book is, and by the way, if you haven't got a free copy, go to nextlevelincome.com and you can click on the pop up there, get a copy of the book, put your address in, we'll even send you a free copy. One of the things we talk about is the power of 1031 exchanges, and I'd love for you to walk through like what a 1031 exchange is, Tim, and then we're going to talk about some other, really more advanced strategies that you can pair up because I think a lot of our listeners know how powerful real estate can be because you can buy real estate, you can use leverage, you can pay it off over time as that equity grows. You can do what's called a 1031 exchange where you don't have to pay tax on that gain. We did that the first property I bought. So we'll give an example so the audience, if you haven't heard of a 1031, you can kind of get a flavor and then you can take over here, Tim. So 21 years old, I bought my first property. I was at Virginia Tech. My mom co-signed on the loan. I did a FHA loan, put $3,000 down on a $90,000 townhouse. When I sold that townhouse about 15 years later, the value had doubled. Maybe it wasn't 15 years. Let's say 15 years. Value had doubled, but I only had $3,000 that I put down on it. So I had a nice chunk of capital. I did a 1031 exchange and bought with no additional money out of my pocket a $700,000 office in downtown Nashville, but I bought it from the bank. So I negotiated, got it for $525,000. And that office ended up cash flowing $3,000 a month. So I love that because my $3,000 investment, 15 years later turned into $3,000 a month in income. And the cool thing was the depreciation from that office at that higher basis was able to offset the income that we got. So it could be very powerful in terms of compounding. And the neat thing is you can do that really indefinitely. So I know you've used that strategy, Tim, and there's some other more sophisticated strategies as I mentioned. I'd love to hear your perspective on that strategy.
No, that's a great strategy. And what's interesting is so 1031 exchange, you have to usually identify three properties within 45 days and then close within
Yeah,
180 days. You
yeah,
have to have a licensed a mediator
yeah,
to hold that money because you can't touch that money,
yeah,
goes into the next property,
yeah,
and you could save, major taxes and then always increase your properties. So it has to be like in kind or greater to or equal value, or you can even take a loan if you want greater value on a property.
yeah,
But you could save some people some major taxes by doing that.
yeah,
And what's sad is there are some financial advisors, accountants, and attorneys who are scared about it and they push their clients away from it. And I hate to
really,
see that
yeah,
because now they're paying all those taxes where you could
yeah,
save the money on taxes.
yeah,
And I could go into an example then a little more in depth if you
yeah,
like.
yeah. I
Uh,
love it.
all right.
Yeah.
So I have a client. Unfortunately, she became a widow.
Hmm.
Okay. And she lost her husband and they had a large real portfolio. So this goes out to all your like mom and pop real estate people out there that have investment properties that say maybe, you're just tired of managing. You're tired of TT. I would say
Yeah.
tenants, toilets, and trash, as we know.
Yeah.
That's not called Tim Tepes today. The wrong TT. Tenants, toilets, and trash. All right. So they don't want to deal with it. They have children that don't want to deal with the rental properties. They don't want to deal with those tenants.
Yeah.
So we could do a 1031 exchange. I have a team of people I work with into a K1 and DST. So now they're going to be saving the taxes. They're still going to get monthly income and they don't deal with the everyday headaches. So it's true passive income, true mailbox money. So let's go back to that widow.
Yeah.
We sold the properties. It was close to $8 million worth of real estate. She would have had to pay the government close to $2 million in taxes.
Yeah. Because she probably had almost no debt on those at that point, is my
And she
guess.
had no debt,
Yeah.
clear and free.
Yeah.
Okay. So clear and free, $8 million
Yeah.
dollars to go invest into other properties.
Yeah.
So, as you know, the biggest stumbling block and the hardest part is identify three properties to buy.
Yeah.
Okay. Most people are trying to buy in their market or stay next to their home. Well, here, when you go into the K1s and DSTs, we could do that across the country.
Hmm.
So not only did we identify more than three properties, we went in different states, we went in different products. So now we're just diversified. So we went to mobile homes, we went to self-storage, we went to apartment complexes, we went to hotels, and some industrial buildings. Not the only commercial office building we went into was Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. Brand new
Oh,
building,
interesting. Yeah.
35-year lease on there.
Yeah.
So she's averaging between 5 to 7% return on those properties,
Yeah.
but that's before the tax benefits, before
Yeah.
any of the depreciation. But then the upside is she gets the appreciation.
Yeah.
Now the
Massive. Yeah.
key going back to this is just that $2 million she's saving. Even at 2 million at 5%, that's $100,000.
Yeah. So she got an extra 100 grand that she would not have had.
She
And it's
got extra.
probably, it's probably more like 120, $140,000.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but if you even take that, the 5%, 100,000,
Yeah.
that's 1.2 million a year. And within less than 2 years, she even got that income back from our government. Think about that, of the 2 million that she would have paid the government in taxes.
Yeah. Incredible.
So I'm
Yeah.
her biggest hero, and she's telling all her friends on that. So
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of these, it might be smaller units, it could be 5, 6 units, 8 units, 10 units that people have, selling
Yeah.
their properties, hooking up with my team member who could find the DSTs across the country. He's a
Yeah.
financial advisor, hooking up with our attorney who sets up then trusts, and we'll get into
Yeah.
that a little bit more,
Yeah.
and and have the 1031 mediator to handle all the paperwork. And the best
Yeah.
part is she didn't have to attend to one of the closings. She did everything electronically. We set her up with an ACH payment, so it goes right to her bank account. She could just go on the computer. We taught her how to log into her computer and set up that stuff.
Yeah.
And she could see that, and she just sees that going. So it's not really mailbox money for her. It's right
Yeah.
in the checking account. And we actually took it one step further. Her financial advisor got involved. So she's taking that income, putting that into and paying stocks, and then taking those dividends and putting them into tax-free bonds.
Love it.
So,
Love it. Yeah.
there's a whole strategy that we could talk about and go
Yeah.
way beyond this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it gets real exciting, and I love this
Yeah.
part of the business. Not thinking that I'll be a residential realtor. I thought I'll be a builder and drawing homes, doing residential stuff. And here I am, selling properties across the country and helping people build generational wealth.
No, it's fantastic. And that's really, I like to say real estate is a get rich slow strategy. I
Do you know
mentioned,
what? Hey, I'm going to
yeah,
interrupt
go
you real
ahead.
quick. I always
Oh,
say it's
please.
not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Hmm.
Just like dollar cost average dividend
Yeah.
reinvestments, I mean, you could have over six figures if you start young enough in your 20s. I don't know what Trump is doing right now for the kids with that investment,
Yeah.
by the they're 18, 20 years old. But if you start now, by the time,
Yeah.
you're in your retirement age, you start when in your 20s, you have a nice chunk of change. I started two 529B plans. I have two daughters, okay?
Yeah.
But two 529B plans, saving for college education for children before I ever was married. I started at 22. I didn't get married till I was 30. And then when I was 31 and 32 or 33 is when I had my children.
Yeah.
And the time they graduate, this is the key, their college education was paid for, and I had $35 left in the account. How I got I,
Yeah.
I got so damn lucky on that. But their education's paid for it and they don't have to worry about that. So they can come
Yeah.
out tax free. And they're going to wind up in getting the investment properties, but they don't want them. So I'm going to be doing the 1031 exchanges myself.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's the cool thing is, even if your kids, that's the great thing about real estate, even if your kids don't want it, there are strategies like you just mentioned where you can put them into something more passive. And if you want to learn more strategies to help teach your kids or help structure these things for your kids, we've got a great resource, nextlevelincome.com/kids. And we talk about how to start, get your kids Roth IRAs. If you have your own business, you can pay your children. That's tax efficient. And yeah, I was showing my older son, who we were talking about earlier, will be 16 next month. And he saw his Roth IRA account balance this past week and was like, that's doubled since like he remembered the amount.
Um,
So it is amazing, the power when you start young with all this. And yeah, with real estate, you buy a piece of real estate, you stay patient. I know a lot of people, like when I was in college, they would buy a property, they'd flip it, they'd be like, oh, look at my new watch. I bought it. I made 20 grand on this property. I paid tax. I was able to buy this $10,000 watch. And I just remember thinking, well, that's silly. You could have, you know, taken that $200,000 property and bought a $400,000 property. So I wonder if he ever thinks about that now, what that property would be worth.
That's a good point. It's always living
Yeah,
below your means. You hear
yeah,
that all the time, pay yourself first,
yeah,
take care of expenses, but when you get those bonuses at work or you get the high
yeah,
commission or something to sale, throw that, extra to that principal in or to
yeah,
investments. That's
yeah.
the big key. But, so a little exciting. I tell this stuff to school and the high schools when I go in and talk every now and then. I'll tell them, I'll pay you $10,000 a month for 1 month to cut the football field, right? Or I'll pay
Okay.
you a penny a day and I'll double it every day for 30 days. What do you want? The penny doubled or $10,000? Well, I had one kid say, well, our football field is AstroTurf. We don't have to cut it. I said, all right, go out and
I,
vacuum it for me.
hire that kid.
Yeah.
Hire that
I
kid.
said, I
Yeah.
said, go out and vacuum it. Well, a lot of them say they want the 10,000. Some they say they want the penny, but they don't understand why they want the penny. Then
Yeah.
when you start explaining, I may bring out their phones and on the calculators and do the calculations. After 30 days, it's worth over $1 million.
Yeah.
1 cent, 2 cent, 4, 8, 16. And then when I get to 16, I look at 2, 64. Now you see the power of the compounding, the snowball effect.
Yeah.
Start getting excited. And then I pull out, like I'm going to say McDonald's stock, and I said, what does McDonald's? Oh, they're hamburgers and I'm fast food. I was like, no, they're a real estate company.
Yeah.
They own all the popular corners and their franchisees play real estate. But I said in this McDonald's, I said, if you buy it direct, it's $100 a month, $1,200 a year. After 30 some years, and then I take 1,200 a year times 30. Okay, you might have 40 some $1,000s of your money in it, but it might be worth now instead of 40,000, it might be worth about 100,000. And that's all
Yeah.
power of compounding and dividend reinvestment stock splits.
Yeah.
So it
That's
gets real exciting,
incredible.
and that's great for
Yeah.
children. Like your son who's 16, you start showing him stuff like that. Oh, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. No, it's fun to teach them about those things and see their eyes light up,
Hmm.
and see the power of it and see their thinking change. My son same son was working at our car wash this past summer, and he came home one day. We were paying him $10 an hour plus $10 commission for every membership he sold. So he was doing well. But he came home one day, he goes, Dad, I was doing the math for how many people came through and what their washes cost. He goes, you make a lot of money on that car wash every month. I go, yeah. I go, and he looks at me, he goes, I said, well, how long would you have to work to make the same amount? He goes, like, I'd have to work years to make the same amount that you make. I go, well, do you want to work at a car wash or own a car wash? So, and then I said, you gotta understand the business before you should buy the business. So we got into those sorts of things, and that kind of leads us to the next step here, Tim. 1031 can be powerful for you and your family, and I want to touch on when you have a lady like your client who passes away, her heirs will then inherit that $8 million portfolio at whatever basis it is now. So she probably had maybe a zero basis after all the depreciation initially. So if you're, for those of you that are listening, if you own a residential property for 27 and a half years, it depreciates down to zero over that time. And if you have no debt, if you had $100,000 property you purchased, now it's worth $1 million 30 years later, your heirs can inherit that $1 million property, sell it the next day at $1 million and owe no tax. Um, Talk a little bit about what a DST is, Tim. What a K1 is, and some of these other strategies that can really supercharge, the savings and the ability to really not only generate wealth but really preserve wealth.
Yeah, that's a great on preserving wealth. But yeah, like you said, when she sold with $1 million, it'll be a
Yeah,
stepped up basis for
yeah,
them to sell that.
yeah,
But if you have it into a trust, and
yeah,
if you look at the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts are poor, the Rockefellers are still going strong.
yeah,
And why? Because that was the trust.
yeah,
So you could put that into the trust, and you could do what they call a dynasty trust, the Waterfall trust, all
mhm,
different names for it, the Rockefellers trust. But when you put that into the trust and you have a Delaware statutory trust, okay,
yeah,
so basically you own nothing. It's not in your name, but you control everything.
mhm,
Okay, so that could help you in legal battles. But the best part is when it's in a dynasty trust like that, you avoid probate.
Hmm.
So the next thing about that is you get the K1, so you get all the tax benefits, you get all the write-offs as an owner, as a
Hmm.
landlord, without the daily head we said before. And what's nice about it, once it goes into that trust, it could pass on and you could have rules and regulations. You'll start like a family business, your family
Hmm.
creed, and you have rules and regulations how that money could be used. And it can be
Yes.
passed down from generation to generation to generation. And, they can look back and say, who was Chris 30 years ago, your grandchildren, and my great great grandchildren could look back and say, who was Tim, and same with this lady right now. And
Yeah.
their family could look back and say, we set those up with a great estate attorney. So it could be every year, it just keeps going on. And then what happens is they could take so much money out, maybe for education or borrow against for a house, and then pay the trust back.
Right.
And we get more about that with
Yeah.
insurance, with whole life insurance as well.
Yeah.
But they could pay that back to the estate and borrow against state, void probate. And what's nice is, so when it goes down the courthouse, they're not going to say like, oh, John Doe only died with this. They can't read their whole will and see what all their assets are,
Yeah.
which is nice because of probate, but it gives generation wealth and income for generations to come.
Yeah. No, and I want to really underscore and highlight something that you just said there, Tim, which is, you set up the trust, but then you have like rules. You have a family creed. And
Agreed.
yeah, and that's really powerful because, giving your children or giving your family the financial resources is one thing, but giving them the rules and the education around it is a whole other thing. And we're big fans of whole life insurance. Um, Here at Next Level Income. And that's one of the things we talk about is, well, you save money, and give it, pay for your kids' college education or give them, money. That's great. But if they have to borrow that money and understand the cost of capital, the opportunity cost, then you're teaching them another lesson. And what happens is they realize that, wait a minute, I got to make sure that there's the right ROI. Like if I have to pay this money back, but if you borrow $100,000, you can turn it into 200,000, $1 million. It makes it more valuable versus saying, like the Vanderbilts did, oh, I'm just going to take this $1 million and I'm going to buy a piece of property. I'm going to throw great parties, and then next thing you know, two generations later, there's not a millionaire in the family. And I love that story because the
Mhm.
Biltmore is 2 miles away from our house here in Asheville, so it's very very apropos that you brought that up versus the Rockefellers who set up the proper trust. They taught their children the same rules, and they have who knows how much wealth at this point. Some estimate it could be as much as $1 trillion or more.
And what's nice about that, you don't hear too much about them.
Yeah,
They're low key,
yeah,
but you don't see them on the list of the richest people because that's how low key that trust is. And
yeah,
hitting home right next to your place with the Vanderbilts, you understand that. You said something key earlier is teaching their kid, your son, okay,
yeah,
about working at a car wash and owning the car wash, understanding the business, understanding
yeah,
trust, what the rules and regulations are. And that goes back to my dad also, if you
yeah.
wanted something in our house, you have to work for it.
Love
Not,
that.
and everything looks like a silver on the outside, like, oh, this was handed to you, that was given to you. They don't know the hours, the nights, and the
Yeah,
weekends, and the sacrifices you did just for the
yeah,
family,
absolutely.
And when I
Yeah,
graduated college, I lived at home and owned investment properties. And my one friend says, "Oh, you're too embarrassed to live in your properties." And I said, "No." I says, "That's it, that I don't have
yeah,
to pay myself."
yeah,
Okay. At home, if my clothing got down in front of the wash machine, it made it into the washer and dryer. There were always leftovers in the refrigerator, but you always cut the grass every week. You
yeah.
wash the cars every week, paint wash line poles, mailbox, lamp posts,
That's
did the
right.
work around the house. You weren't told to do it.
Yeah,
You just did it and you got free rent.
yeah,
So that's the key there was,
yeah,
and I got to save that money for 8 years.
yeah.
And
I
like you
love
said,
that.
I didn't go out live high off the hall. I lived below my means and I
Yeah,
kept putting that back into the stock market and into real
yeah,
estate, and that pays off over time. But it's a matter of being disciplined and setting up the right strategies. And then over time, as you said, great mentors and just learn and taking a crumb from everybody. And I always do the 1% rules. I try to learn one thing every day. That's
yeah.
365 days a year where you learn something new. And it just compounds. You got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, great role, great role, and yeah, I love how you brought that back full circle, Tim. With the value of these lessons, and it's not easy to be
Hmm.
disciplined and save money, but it is straightforward to do these strategies. And if you do it over a long period of time, time is your friend over long periods. Compound interest, it really is one of the wonders of the world. And Tim, for those listeners that want to learn more about you, some of the things that offer your clients, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, I'll give you my cell phone. I have
Yeah.
no problem with that. It's 484-275-0056. Or you can really simple, easy. My email is timtepes@gmail.com. So make
Perfect.
it
And we'll
easy as
put,
possible.
yeah, we'll put that in the show notes, and we'll add your website as well for our listeners that want to get in touch with you. Tim, it's been great catching up here. I appreciate all the lessons that you've shared with our audience. Thank you very much.
I appreciate Chris, and I look forward to more conversations off air. I really enjoy it.
Likewise. Thank you.
So I got one last thing here, Chris.
Yeah, please.
I
Bonus
want every
round.
subscriber to hit that like button and let's go viral with this.
Awesome. Let's do it. We'll get it out
So
on
like
social media.
Chris's webcast, our podcast here, and let's let Chris go viral again, okay?
Let's
The more
go.
likes, the better, and subscribe.
Hey, Chris here again. I hope you found this episode valuable. Now, I have one more thing to gift you. We have a page for my coaching clients where you can get a free copy of my book, as well as much more from previous guests on the show. Just check out nextlevelincome.com/coaching to get a free copy of my book, audiobook, and much more. I'll send you a copy of my book and cover all the shipping costs as a thank you for listening to the podcast. Also, please like, share, and take just 90 seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts.